homeless grandmother in rags stumbles into a five-star restaurant, and the head chef drops to his knees the moment he sees her face. Tears stream down his face as guests freeze in shock. This frail woman with silver coily hair and a faded headwrap is the person who fed him from her own plate when he was a starving orphan. He has been searching for her for 20 years, and tonight, in the middle of his own kitchen, he finally found her. Dorothy is 68 years old, homeless for over a decade, invisible to a city that stopped seeing her. Marcus is the executive chef at the city's most exclusive restaurant, a man who built success from nothing. Two lives that should never have crossed again. But what happened on one cold night in 2003 created a debt that could never be repaid with money. The question isn't why she forgot him, it's how he never forgot her. Marcus was 7 years old when he first met Dorothy. It was 2003, winter, one of the coldest nights the city had seen in years. His parents had died in a car accident just 3 months before. No relatives came forward. The system was overwhelmed. And so Marcus found himself on the streets, sleeping behind a dumpster behind a corner store, hungry and alone. Dorothy was 52 then, not yet homeless herself, but already struggling. She worked odd jobs, cleaned houses when she could get the work, lived in a tiny studio apartment that she was barely holding on to. She had no children of her own. Her husband had passed years earlier. She had almost nothing. But on that night, walking home from a cleaning job, she saw a little boy shivering behind the dumpster. She didn't keep walking, she stopped. Dorothy had exactly $7 in her pocket. It was supposed to last her 3 more days until her next job. Instead, she took Marcus to a small diner around the corner and ordered him a hot meal. Pancakes, eggs, sausage, a glass of milk. She watched him eat like he hadn't had food in days because he hadn't. Then she walked him to a shelter, paid for him to have a bed for the night, and gave him her phone number written on a napkin. She told him if he ever needed anything, he should call her. For the next 4 years, Dorothy became the closest thing Marcus had to a mother. She checked on him at the group home where he was eventually placed. She brought him clothes that actually fit. She remembered his birthday every single year. When he aged out of the system at 18, she was the only person there to see him off. But then Marcus made a choice. He enlisted in the military, looking for structure, for a future, for a way out. He promised Dorothy he would come back. He promised he would make something of himself. He kept the first promise. He lost track of the second. The letters he wrote came back returned to sender. The phone number she had given him had been disconnected. When he finally returned to the city 5 years later, the apartment building where she had lived had been demolished, replaced by a luxury condo complex. Dorothy was gone, and Marcus had no idea where to find her. What he didn't know was that Dorothy's life had collapsed while he was away. She lost her job when the cleaning company downsized. She got sick, missed rent, lost her apartment. The city's homeless population grew that year, and Dorothy became one of the invisible. She stayed at shelters when she could, slept in parks when she couldn't. She stopped expecting anyone to remember her. Meanwhile, Marcus built his new life with a singular focus. He worked his way through culinary school, washing dishes, prepping vegetables, learning every station in every kitchen that would hire him. He had talent, but more than that, he had something to prove. 10 years after he returned, Marcus became the executive chef at Laurent, the city's most prestigious restaurant. He was 35 years old, the youngest chef in the restaurant's history to hold the title. Food critics wrote about his soulful approach to comfort food. They didn't know that every dish he created was an attempt to recreate the taste of that first meal Dorothy had bought him, all those years ago. He never stopped looking for her. He hired private investigators. He searched homeless shelters, food banks, community centers. He drove through the city at night, scanning faces on street corners, under bridges, in tent encampments. Every elderly black woman he saw, he studied, hopping. Nothing. And then one night in November, Dorothy walked into his restaurant. She didn't know it was his restaurant. She didn't know who he was. She barely knew who she was anymore. The early stages of dementia had begun to cloud her memory, making the past fuzzy and the present confusing. She had wandered in through the service entrance, confused by the cold, looking for warmth, looking for help. The host was about to call security. The manager was already reaching for his phone. And then Marcus walked out of the kitchen. He saw her, the silver coily hair, the faded headwrap, the weathered dark brown skin. He saw the woman who had once spent her last $7 on a meal for a starving child. He dropped to his knees. But what neither of them knew was that someone else was watching, someone who had been searching for Dorothy too, for very different reasons, and the reunion was about to be interrupted by a secret that would change everything. The man watching from the corner booth was not a restaurant guest. He had been coming to Lauren every Thursday evening for 3 weeks, ordering nothing but coffee, sitting in the same spot, watching. The staff assumed he was a food critic, maybe a health inspector, maybe just a lonely man with nowhere else to go. But he was none of those things. His name was Raymond Cole, and he was a probate attorney. For 6 years, he had been tracking down the last surviving heir to a property dispute that had quietly become one of the most valuable pieces of land in the city. And Dorothy, the homeless woman now standing confused in the middle of a 5-star restaurant, was that heir. Raymond stood up slowly as Marcus helped Dorothy to a chair. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Guests were starring, phones were appearing, someone was already recording. Marcus didn't care. He was kneeling beside Dorothy, holding her fragile hands, asking if she remembered him. She looked at him with cloudy eyes. She didn't, though. The dementia had taken more than her independence. It had taken the memories Marcus had held onto for 20 years. She smiled at him kindly, the way you smile at a stranger who is being nice to you, and Marcus felt his heart crack open. Then Raymond Cole reached them, and everything changed. He introduced himself. He explained that he had been searching for Dorothy for 6 years. He explained that the apartment building where she had lived, the one that had been demolished to make room for luxury condos, had been part of a trust. Her grandmother had owned the land. The developers who bought the building had purchased only the structure, not the underlying deed, a legal distinction that had been buried in paperwork for decades. And Dorothy, as the last surviving descendant, owned that land. The condos built on it, the parking structure beneath it, the retail spaces that lined the ground floor, all of it sat on property that legally belonged to a homeless woman who didn't even remember her own birthday anymore. The amount of money involved was staggering. Raymond said the settlement figure being discussed was somewhere in the neighborhood of $12 million. Marcus stared at him. Dorothy simply looked confused. But what the lawyer said next made Marcus's blood run cold. There was a problem, a significant one. The developers who had built the condos had powerful legal representation. They had already filed motions claiming that Dorothy had abandoned her claim, that the statute of limitations had expired, that she was mentally unfit to manage her own affairs. They were pushing to have her declared legally incompetent, which would allow the court to appoint a guardian. And if that guardian could be influenced, the entire claim could disappear. They had 48 hours until the competency hearing. And there was something else. Raymond lowered his voice. The developers had found out Marcus was involved. They knew about the restaurant. They knew about his connection to Dorothy. And they had already reached out to Lawrence's majority owner with an offer that would be very difficult to refuse. Marcus felt the room tilt. The restaurant, his restaurant, the thing he had spent 15 years building, the career he had sacrificed everything for, was now leverage in a legal battle he hadn't even known existed an hour ago. Raymond handed him a card. He said Marcus needed to make a choice. He could step away, protect his career, and let the system handle Dorothy's fate, or he could fight for her, which would mean going up against people with far more money and far fewer scruples. Either way, the clock was already ticking. Marcus looked at Dorothy. She was shivering slightly, despite the warmth of the room. One of the servers had brought her a glass of water, which she held with both hands, staring at it like she wasn't quite sure what it was for. He thought about the night she found him behind that dumpster. He thought about the way she spent her last $7 on a boy she had never met. He thought about the birthday presents she somehow managed to afford on almost no income, wrapped in newspaper, given with a pride that defied her circumstances. She had saved his life, not dramatically, not in a way that made headlines. She had saved him the way most people are actually saved, through small acts of consistency, through showing up when no one else did, through making a child believe he mattered. And now she didn't even remember his name. The restaurant manager appeared at Marcus's elbow. He spoke quietly, but his face said everything. There were guests waiting for an explanation. There were phones recording. There were calls coming in already, people asking questions, rumors starting to spread. The owner wanted to speak with Marcus immediately. Marcus stood up slowly. He told Raymond Cole he was in. Whatever it took, he was in. Raymond nodded, but his expression was grave. He said there was one more thing Marcus needed to know. The developers had been keeping tabs on Dorothy for months. They knew where she slept, which shelters she used, what routes she walked. They had been waiting for her to either disappear completely or become too sick to matter. They hadn't expected someone like Marcus to find her first, which meant they would be making their move soon, and they wouldn't be using lawyers to do it. Marcus looked at Dorothy again. She had started to hum softly to herself, a song he didn't recognize, her thin fingers tapping against the water glass. She looked so small, so fragile, so utterly unaware that she was at the center of a storm that could destroy everything around her. He knelt beside her one more time. He asked if she would let him take her somewhere safe, somewhere warm, where she could rest and get something to eat. She looked at him, and for just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or just gratitude. She patted his hand and said he was a good boy. Then she let him help her up. The next 2 hours were a blur. Marcus called in every favor he had. He got Dorothy admitted to a private care facility, one with security and medical staff who could monitor her condition. He called Raymond Cole and began planning a legal strategy. He called his own lawyer and started preparing for what he suspected would be a very long fight. And then his phone rang. It was the majority owner of Laurent, a man named Gerald, who had been a mentor, a friend, someone Marcus had trusted. The voice on the other end was cold. Gerald said there had been an offer, a very generous one. The developers wanted to buy out Marcus's stake in the restaurant. They were willing to pay double what it was worth. All Marcus had to do was sign some paperwork and walk away. Marcus asked what would happen if he refused. Gerald paused, then he said that the developers had other ways of making people cooperate, ways that didn't involve money. And now Marcus had 48 hours to make a choice that would destroy someone he loved. Marcus hung up the phone and knew he had crossed a line there was no coming back from. Gerald had been in his life for over a decade. Gerald had given him his first real break in a professional kitchen, had talked him through the lowest moments of his career, had stood in his corner when no one else believed he could lead a kitchen of his own. Now Gerald was on the other side, and the silence between them said everything. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat in a chair beside Dorothy's bed at the care facility, watching her breathe, thinking about the way the world worked, how someone could spend their entire life giving to others and end up with nothing, how someone could build everything from scratch and watch it crumble because of a woman he had tried to help. At 4 a.m, Raymond Cole called. His voice was urgent. He said Marcus needed to come to his office immediately. There was something he needed to see. Marcus arrived just as the sun was coming up. Raymond looked like he hadn't slept either. His desk was covered in paperwork, legal filings, property records that had been pulled from archives across 3 different counties. He told Marcus to sit down. Then he spread out a series of documents that traced the ownership history of Dorothy's grandmother's property. The land had been in the family since 1947, when Dorothy's grandmother, a woman named Maybelle, had purchased it with money she had saved working as a domestic servant for a wealthy white family. Maybelle had been part of the Great Migration, one of millions of Black Americans who left the South looking for opportunity in northern cities. She had built a small apartment building on the land, rented to other Black families who couldn't live in white neighborhoods, created a small piece of stability in a world that offered them almost nothing. When she died, the property passed to her daughter, Dorothy's mother. When Dorothy's mother died, it should have passed to Dorothy. But here was where the story took a turn Raymond hadn't expected. Dorothy had a brother, a younger brother named Samuel, who had died in 1991 in what had been ruled a suicide. Samuel had been living on the streets, struggling with mental illness, completely disconnected from Dorothy's life. But before he died, he had signed a document transferring his share of the inheritance to a third party. A shell company, one that no longer existed on paper but could be traced through a labyrinth of corporate registrations back to the development firm that was now trying to take Dorothy's land. The implications hit Marcus slowly. This wasn't just a legal dispute about paperwork. This was something that had been planned for decades. Someone had been waiting for the property to become valuable, had been positioning themselves to take it since before Dorothy even became homeless. Raymond said he had dug deeper into the development company. The name on the paperwork was generic, forgettable, but the principal investors included a name Marcus recognized immediately. Gerald, his mentor, his friend, the majority owner of Laurent. The man who had just called to threaten him. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. All those years Gerald had been encouraging him, supporting him, helping him build his career. Had Gerald known? Had this been the plan all along? Wait until the property value skyrocketed. Wait until Dorothy was too broken to fight back. Wait until the legal obstacles could be cleared. Or had Gerald gotten involved later, seduced by the money, willing to sacrifice a woman who meant nothing to him for a payout that could fund a dozen restaurants? Either way, Marcus understood now why the fight felt so uneven. He wasn't going up against strangers with deep pockets. He was going up against someone who knew him, who knew his weaknesses, who had been inside his life for over a decade. But it got worse. Raymond said he had received a call from the care facility an hour earlier. Someone had tried to visit Dorothy in the middle of the night. A woman claiming to be her niece, asking to take her out for a walk. The staff had refused, following Marcus's explicit instructions, and the woman had left. But the description matched one of the paralegals who worked for the firm representing the developers. They were already trying to get to her, and the competency hearing was in less than 12 hours. Marcus drove back to the care facility with his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. He found Dorothy awake, sitting by the window of her room, looking out at the courtyard. She seemed calm, peaceful even, humming that same tune he didn't recognize. He pulled a chair up beside her. He asked if she remembered anything about her grandmother, about the apartment building where she used to live. Dorothy's eyes cleared for a moment. She said she remembered a garden in the back. She remembered her grandmother singing while she hung laundry on the line. She remembered the smell of the lilacs that grew along the fence. Then she looked at Marcus and asked him who he was. He told her his name. He told her he had known her a long time ago. He told her she had helped him when he was a boy. She studied his face, searching for something. Then she smiled, that same gentle smile she gave strangers, and said she was glad he was okay. Marcus stayed with her until the nurse came to tell him visiting hours were over. He kissed Dorothy's forehead, promised he would see her tomorrow, and walked out to his car. The parking lot was nearly empty. The sun had set hours ago, and as Marcus approached his vehicle, he noticed something that made him stop. His tires had been slashed, all 4 of them, and tucked under his windshield wiper was a single sheet of paper. He pulled it free and read the message typed in the center of the page. "Walk away, you still have a career to lose." Marcus looked around the parking lot. No one was there. No cars, no people, just the distant hum of the city and the cold wind cutting through his jacket. He called Raymond from inside his car. Raymond answered on the first ring. Marcus told him about the tires, about the note, about the visit to the care facility. Raymond said he was going to file an emergency motion for protection. He was going to contact the court, document the intimidation, make sure the judge knew what was happening. But he also warned Marcus that this was how these fights went. The other side didn't have to win legally. They just had to make it too expensive, too dangerous, too painful to keep fighting. Marcus asked what he should do. Raymond was quiet for a long moment. Then he said there was one option left, something he hadn't mentioned because it was risky, because it could backfire, because it required a kind of evidence that was almost impossible to get. They needed to prove that the developers had known about Dorothy's claim all along, that they had intentionally buried it, that Samuel's signature had been obtained under duress or fraud. If they could do that, the entire case would collapse. But the only person who might have that information was Gerald. And Marcus would have to get it from him himself. The competency hearing was in 9 hours. Marcus had no evidence, no leverage, and a target on his back, but he had something Gerald didn't expect. He had the truth, and he was about to find out how far Gerald was willing to go to keep it buried. Marcus drove to Laurent on a spare tire at 5 in the morning, the restaurant dark and empty except for one light in the back office. He found Gerald sitting at his desk, a glass of whiskey in front of him, looking older than Marcus had ever seen him. Gerald didn't seem surprised to see him. He said he had been expecting this conversation for a long time. Marcus asked him directly. He asked if Gerald had known about Dorothy, about the land, about the connection between them. He asked if everything, the mentorship, the support, the friendship, had all been part of a plan to get close to someone who might eventually be a problem. Gerald was quiet for a long time, then he laughed, but there was no humor in it. He said he hadn't known about Marcus and Dorothy when they first met. He hadn't even connected the dots until Marcus started asking questions about the property dispute, until he mentioned the woman who had helped him when he was a child. Then Gerald had looked into it, pulled the records, realized the coincidence. A homeless woman Marcus had been searching for was the same woman standing between Gerald and $12 million. Gerald said he had tried to ignore it. He had hoped Marcus would let it go, would walk away, would choose his career over some old woman he had known for a few years decades ago. He had given Marcus every opportunity to step aside. But Marcus hadn't taken them. Now here they were. Marcus asked about Samuel, Dorothy's brother. He asked how Gerald had gotten a mentally ill homeless man to sign over his inheritance. Gerald's face changed, something hardened in his eyes. He said Samuel had been easy. He had needed money for drugs, for food, for survival. A few $100s had been enough. Samuel hadn't even understood what he was signing. He had died 3 weeks later, alone in an alley, and no one had connected it to anything. Marcus felt sick. He asked if that was the plan for Dorothy too. Wait until she was too sick, too confused, too alone to fight back, and then make the problem disappear. Gerald stood up. He said Marcus was too idealistic for this world. He said the money from this deal would have funded a dozen restaurants, created hundreds of jobs, built something real. Dorothy was one old woman with no family, no future, no one who even knew she existed. What did it matter if she got a payout she couldn't understand or use? Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He had been recording the entire conversation. Gerald stared at him. His face went pale. Marcus said he wasn't idealistic. He just remembered who had been there when he had nothing, and he would rather lose everything than forget that. He walked out of the restaurant and never looked back. The competency hearing was supposed to happen at 9 that morning, but Raymond had already filed an emergency motion to delay, attaching Marcus's recording as evidence of fraud, intimidation, and conspiracy. The judge agreed to review the new evidence before proceeding. Within 48 hours, everything changed. The recording was authenticated. The developer's legal team scrambled to contain the damage, but there was no way to spin a confession like that. Gerald was removed from his position as majority owner of Laurent. The shell company's assets were frozen. The court appointed a neutral guardian for Dorothy, someone with no connection to either side. And 3 weeks later, the ruling came down. Dorothy was declared the rightful owner of her grandmother's land. The settlement negotiations began immediately, and this time, the developers had no leverage. The final figure wasn't 12 million, it was closer to 18. But Marcus wasn't thinking about the money when he sat beside Dorothy's bed at the care facility, watching her look out the window at the garden the staff had planted in the courtyard. She seemed calmer now. The facility had doctors who specialized in memory care. She had warm clothes, regular meals, a room with a view. She didn't understand what had happened, didn't know about the lawsuit or the settlement or the man who had once been her friend. But sometimes Marcus thought peace was enough. He visited her every week. He brought her dishes from restaurants he worked at, small things she might recognize, flavors that might reach something deep inside her. She rarely remembered him from one visit to the next, but she always smiled when he arrived, and she always said he was a good boy. Marcus had lost Laurent. He had lost Gerald's friendship. He had lost years of work building a career that now had a complicated reputation attached to it. Some people in the industry saw him as a hero. Others saw him as a liability, someone who would turn on his own partners. But he had also found something he hadn't expected. A week after the settlement was finalized, Raymond Cole called him with a piece of information that had been buried in the legal records. Dorothy had no living relatives, no one to inherit what remained of her estate after her passing. The court needed to designate someone as her beneficiary. Raymond asked if Marcus wanted to be considered. Marcus said yes. And then he found out something that stopped him cold. Among Dorothy's personal belongings, the items that had been recovered from the shelter where she had last stayed, was a small wooden box. Inside was a stack of letters, yellowed with age, tied together with a piece of string. They were the letters Marcus had written her from the military, every single one. She had kept them for over 20 years, carried them from apartment to shelter to street corner, held onto them even when she lost everything else. And tucked inside the top envelope was a photograph. It showed a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, sitting at a diner counter, eating pancakes. In the background, barely visible, was a woman with silver-streaked hair, watching him with an expression of quiet tenderness. Dorothy had taken that photo on the night they met. She had kept it all those years. She had never forgotten him, even when her mind started to fade, even when she couldn't remember his name or his face. Some part of her had held onto the boy she had fed on the coldest night of her life. Marcus held that photograph for a long time. He thought about how the world works, how one small act of kindness can ripple across decades, how a woman with almost nothing had given him the only thing she could, and how that gift had come back to save her in the end. He wasn't the same person he had been before all this happened. He had lost his restaurant, his reputation, his sense of certainty about the world. but he had found something he hadn't known he was looking for. He had found the reason she had saved him in the first place. Some debts aren't paid with money, they're paid with remembering. They're paid with showing up when it matters, with standing in the gap when there's no one else, with choosing to see someone the world has decided to ignore. Dorothy had seen him when he was invisible, and in the end, that was all he had ever needed to do for her. Now the world would know her story too. There are thousands of Dorothys in every city, elderly women and men who once had families, careers, homes, stories that meant something. People who fed children who weren't theirs, who worked jobs no one thanked them for, who built legacies that were erased by time and circumstance, and a system that too often looks right through them. Most of them will never have a Marcus. They will never walk into a restaurant and find someone who remembers what they gave. They will disappear quietly, buried in unmarked graves, their photographs lost, their letters thrown away, their names forgotten within a generation. That is the part of this story that stays with you. Because Dorothy didn't save Marcus because she expected something in return. She didn't know he would become a successful chef. She didn't know he would spend 20 years searching for her. She didn't know that one cold night, kneeling beside a dumpster, she was planting a seed that would take 2 decades to bloom. She did it because it was right, because when you see a child shivering behind a dumpster, you feed him. That was who she was. That was who she had always been. And maybe that's the question this story leaves us with. Not whether we will ever be repaid for the kindnesses we give, but whether we are paying attention to the people around us who might need one. Someone in your city is sleeping on a bench tonight. Someone is eating their first meal in days at a shelter. Someone is holding onto a photograph of a person they haven't seen in years, hoping they might matter to someone somewhere before it's too late. We don't all have $18 million to win, but we all have the choice to see. That was Dorothy's gift to Marcus, and in the end, it was the only gift that mattered. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. There are more stories like this waiting to be told.